Hi, and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm B.C. Cloutier, President of Action for Life, and this is Father Michael Orsi. Nice to see you as always, Father.
Thank you.
Today, I thought we might talk about the world's problems.
All right. That's going to take a while, folks.
Actually, I was reading something and it caught my attention. There's a global research firm, third largest in the world, called IPSOS, IPSOS, and they do a monthly survey of the most pressing issues in the world. They did a survey on August 23rd, and I thought it would be interesting to review what people have expressed as their top five concerns: inflation, poverty and social inequality. Inequality, crime and violence, unemployment, and financial and political corruption. What's missing from this list? Let me tell you, climate change.
Oh, that's first and foremost on my mind. I wake up in terror every day.
So,
being in Florida, it's getting hot each day.
So we have an administration that is completely focused on climate. They're spending money like, dare I say, drunken sailors to force electric cars down our throats that many of us don't want. Forget the rant. So what we really need to talk about is poverty and maybe what the Bible says about inequality. And as is usual in our programs, I'd like to, if I can, quote some scripture. This from James chapter 5. Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted, your clothes are moth-eaten, your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. You've lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You've fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. I don't know, Father. It seems to me like people are awfully concerned with things that are not as important as the things we should be concerned with, like poverty, like social inequality, etc.
And climate change.
You know what? Up to a point, I agree with climate change, but it took us, probably 125, 150 years to get to this point. It seems to me that we could have a 20 or 30-year plan and not a 5-year plan.
Right. Well, I want to just say this about climate change. We should be concerned about the ecology, and those are all wonderful things, clean water, whatever the case may be. I think that climate change has become almost a worldwide religion, if you will, because it's the main concern of a certain group of people, but also it is a way of getting people on the same page. And climate change does not just simply say, it's getting hot, so I should wear a pink jacket instead of a black jacket, okay? What it does say, though, is we have to cool the world down, and therefore we have to cut down on the carbon emissions and go into electric vehicles and those sort of things. So it is a way, once again, of a worldwide view that the world can be controlled by an elite group of people who have concocted some idea that the world is heating up rapidly and that all of our lives are in danger. You have this poor young girl, Greta, Thunberg. And the poor child, she started very young with this, but she's a young girl now, woman in her 20s, but there's almost a terrified look about her, and there's a screeching and screaming that young people think that their lives are coming to an end and that something has to be done immediately. Look, folks, I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm not saying not to be aware, but I don't think we should be terrifying people about something that, it hasn't happened in like 50 million years, and it's not imminent. In other words, I think you'd be very safe to buy property in Hawaii or in Martha's Vineyard.
Well, this goes back to the pandemic, right? Another issue where let's just scare people into doing what we want them to do.
Right.
And the thing that really angers me is, and I'm not against people being rich. I've done okay in life, so I get it. But you know, all of these people want us to drive electric cars while they're flying around in Gulfstream jets. And they are emitting more pollution when they go from point A to point B than about 1,000 cars do in a week.
But it's okay for them.
Right,
They're
because
saving the
they're
rest
elites.
of us. Yeah, these elites are saving us. So yeah, that's why when we talk about climate change, folks, I mean, be a little circumspect. That's not the best word I could find. Be circumspect about this. There are other issues that I think deserve a lot more attention, and BC brought some of them up just a little while ago. You know, about poverty. There are people who are extremely poor. Thank God, in our own country, for the most part, people are at least having their basic needs provided for. However, ways we can see, because of, when we talked about this in the past, of the unhindered immigration coming in, there are people living on the streets.
Right.
And certainly some of our big cities are inundated, and they're trying to make provisions to get them off the streets and to feed them. Let me say this. We talked about, you know, bringing people in once they're here. If you allow them to come in, once they're here, they have to be treated in a humane way. And that means to try to find them shelter and to give them food and to give them clothing.
Father, let me ask you about a related issue, and that is homelessness. I think if you speak to anyone who has spent time in the federal prison system, they will tell you between 25 and 35% of all the inmates in federal prison are mentally ill.
Yeah.
And in many instances, they were only sent to prison because there was no alternative. Now, years ago, I sound like an old guy now, but I guess I am. Years ago, we had what were called asylums. And I know that they were not the nicest places, but I also know that people got a warm bed and 3 meals a day and some basic attention to their needs.
Right.
And somewhere along the line, the elites thought that these people were being imprisoned and they should be given their freedom. So now their freedom is choice between jail or living on the street. And I'm horrified by the fact that we could bring these people back to barracks, dormitories, asylums, I don't care what word you use, and they would be far better off, and so would the rest of the citizenry that has to put up with this madness.
I'm somewhat familiar with this problem regarding, you know, people who are either imprisoned or people who are living out on the street because of homelessness, because of poverty. Number of years ago, I think it was back in the 60s, we had a mayor up in New York called Ed Koch.
Oh, yeah. How am I doing, he used to say.
How am I doing? Like, folks, he was a great mayor in many, many ways. And what he tried to do is to get the homeless people off the streets, especially in the winter months. Many of them were dying on the streets, cold. Or they would sleep on the subway grid,
to get that
and
heat.
the smoke would come up, the steam would come up. They'd get pneumonia and they would die. So, and the other part of the problem was they were accosting people on the streets too for money and scaring people. It was no good for business, and certainly it was no good for the image of the city. So he tried to put them in shelters. Well, you know, some people who I suppose they meant well went to court, and the judges said that these people had a right to live on the streets.
Right.
And so they were released. They didn't have to go to the shelter. And once again, the streets became dangerous, and they also became very, very dirty because, folks, if you have no house to go to, there's no toilet for you to use except to use the streets. So once again, this is happening in our big cities, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. Now, there was an effort on the part of Mayor Koch. It didn't work out. I'm sure the cities today, if they tried to do the same thing, would run into the same roadblocks.
Well, and the politicians would lose votes.
Yeah, of course. The other part of this is that there were people who, because they have no place else to go, they would start acting, some of them, in a very bizarre way. And at one time during my ministry, I was assigned to a state mental hospital in New Jersey. And there were many people in there that were, permanent residents, but there were some people who were cyclical. And they would come back. They had a chart, and they could chart when they were going to come back.
Really?
And as the weather got cold in November, they would come back. And there was food, shelter, clothing, and friends. So, yeah, can we do things like that again voluntarily? I'm sure we can do something like that again. People deserve food, shelter, clothing. Can we force it? According to the law, as I read it now, in most of your major cities, you cannot enforce it.
Which is, it's an interesting conundrum in New York. Now, we know San Francisco is off the charts.
Right.
I mean, a major mall. I spent some time in San Francisco. Beautiful mall, Nordstrom, et cetera, gone, closed because of the homeless issue. There are people in San Francisco defecating on the street in broad daylight.
Right.
It is that bad. Now, New York, who has always been in favor of open borders, New York City particularly, but the state also, has come to the realization that they cannot handle this influx of people.
Right.
It wasn't a problem when it was the border states, those of us in the South, and the Southwest, even worse than we have in Florida. But now that they are inundated with these people, and as you point out, Mayor Adams has said, I'm powerless and I don't know what to do. I'm running out of space. I'm certainly running out of money. I don't know that they can tax people anymore in New York, particularly not in New York City, where there's a city tax as well as a state tax. It's a crazy situation. And yet, again, no one seems to, and when I say no one, our elected officials do not seem prepared to take a stand and say, this is what we need to do.
Right. Well, as I said earlier, it's 4 votes, and it is a certain kind of a liberal or socialist, I'm going to use the term socialist mindset, because I think the ultimate goal is that we do tax people more and that we have this leveling effect, equity. Everybody is the same. So when you hear these words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the more you let people in, the more you have the need to take care of those people. What happens is the more you get taxed, and eventually everybody is at a common denominator.
We can talk more about that.
Yeah.
We'll be back right after this. Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events. Welcome back to A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm BC Cloutier. Father, we were talking about this IPSOS poll, worldwide poll conducted in August, and the number 5 concern that people expressed was political and financial corruption. I am sorry to say, I think that Washington is a rigged game. There are 535 players, and they're all playing for themselves. So it doesn't matter what political party. I mean, I look at the wealth that's amassed by our elected officials who are making less than $200,000. Most of them are right around $200,000. It's very, very troubling that we can't seem to pass term limits. I mean, I know we're asking, in the case of term limits, we're asking the fox to guard the hen house. But it seems to me if we constantly got new blood in the Senate and Congress, that we might have less shenanigans going on.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you that we do need term limits. Certainly, there's a fact that our politicians, they allegedly come to do good, and they end up doing very, very well. And they have joined themselves at the hip with Wall Street. We have crony capitalism. We also have politicians who, once they leave office, get into lobbying. And of course, the lobbyists grease their palms very well. And the politicians in office and those outside of office who spend time in Washington end up doing rather well for themselves and for their families. So, there is corruption. Is it necessarily criminal? Well, that's to be debated.
Menendez in New Jersey was acquitted, right?
Right, right. So
it wasn't criminal, at least not to the extent that the jury was willing to convict him.
Right. You have to have the exact charge. Now, somebody might be doing something that you say, gee, they're making money on their political connections. Is that illegal? And unless you have a charge that this is where this person literally broke the law, you cannot stop that unless you have at least some control with term limits.
I think that's right.
I mean, look, we have people who are in the Senate, and Congress, for a million years, they just don't go away. And then they reach a certain age. I'm not going to mention any names, folks, but, enough is enough. Go away. And the reason why they stay is because they're good at raising money and good at doling out money to people that are running for office. But there does come a time when people have to step down for the good of the country and for their own good.
Well, I mean, we make airline pilots retire at 65
Right.
because they are responsible for a lot of people, and there are a lot of companies that have mandatory retirement ages, even directors who are not involved in the day-to-day operation of big companies, but sit on the board and obviously establish policy, at some point are usually forced to retire, but based on age. And yet we don't have that with our elected officials.
Right.
And so we end up with, let's use the most egregious example, Dianne Feinstein, who is being told how to vote by her aides. Just say yay, just say nay. It's crazy.
It's pathetic to see a woman like that, incapacitated, unable to make up her own mind, and to have her being wheeled into the Senate chamber. That's very sad for the country. It's very sad for Mrs. Feinstein, too. We have other politicians that are in the same boat to one degree or another.
Well, Strom Thurmond on the other side of the aisle was the same way, right? That, he was certainly in the at least early throes of dementia, and he continued to serve in the Senate.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes people talk about age, and there was an article in the, excuse my expression, the New York Times, folks, by a man named Frank Bruni. And he said, basically, why is Biden's age an issue and Trump's age is not an issue? Now, they're not too far apart in age. I mean, 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, 3 years apart. Well, the simple answer to that is, because the president is showing signs of cognitive decline.
Yep.
That's why it's not the same thing. Would an age limit be appropriate? It might be. But is that the only thing that we would use to determine whether a person is fit for office or not? Because you're Senator Fetterman, and he's a relatively young man, but certainly it doesn't seem like he is competent to hold his seat. So I don't know if,
I think that was true before the stroke, just for what it's worth.
It's true. But I mean, the problem is not just age, it's the person's competence.
Right.
Conceivably, you can get somebody who is in their 80s who's still relatively sharp. But that's why we have a democracy, folks, where people can vote and say, look, let's make a decision here as to whether or not we want this person back. Mitch McConnell is having some problems. He's 82 years old.
We should open these positions to the next generation.
Of course.
We'll bring new blood, new ideas, new energy. It's crazy that we're allowing this whole group of people on both sides of the
Both
aisle
sides.
to serve.
Yeah.
They're not serving us.
It's not a way to make America grow as a country. As a matter of fact, I think that some people abroad might be laughing at us, saying, "Look at that." Now, thank God we at least have a balance. You know, we have a Senate. You know, there are 100 senators there that can, we hope, balance things off. We have a Congress that can balance off the Senate and vice versa. And we also have the Congress and the Senate that can balance off a president who might not be in full command of his faculties. But that's up to the voters to do that. I don't know if a law is going to do it. I don't think a law is going to do it. Because, as I said, you have sometimes a younger person who is acting in a bizarre way, and an older person who might be very, very mature. So I think the way to go maybe is term limits,
right,
to prevent, this serial person being elected to office time and time again, and never being able to get rid of them because of control of the purse.
Well, we know that the incumbency has great advantages.
Sure does, yeah.
And it's also sad, I guess this is another subject, kind of going down a rabbit hole, how much time, particularly Congress people, are only elected for 2 years, how much of their time they spend raising money.
Half the time.
Rather than not doing the country's business, they're, raising money.
They get into office and they're there, for a very brief period of time, and they're out raising money again on the circuit. But
yeah.
Term, I was talking to one of our congressmen here in South Florida, and he said to me, thinks that 3 2-year terms should do it.
I would think so.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think 3 or 4 in Congress and maybe 2 in the Senate, which is still
Senate.
12 years.
Right.
If you served 3 years as a congressperson, that would be 6.
Right.
Another 12 in the Senate, 18 years.
Yeah.
The system was designed that citizens would come and serve, right? And
Right.
then they
and
would
then go home.
Go home.
Yeah, go home.
In the state of New Hampshire, they still do that. I think the elected officials in New Hampshire, if I remember right, only meet for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. But it's 6 weeks where they do business.
Right.
They get things done.
Right.
They're also, I think, volunteers. They get per diem for their expenses, but that's all.
Well, even with the presidency, we have 2 4-year terms.
Right.
Right. And that wasn't always that way. We have a constitutional amendment. I think it was the 22nd Amendment.
Because of FDR.
FDR, he was there forever and ever, and he was not a well man either.
Right.
But, he was able to stay in because a war was going on. The grateful nation reelected him, and, then God made the final decision, and he died in office.
If you, and I'm sure you have, if you read history, it was pretty well known that FDR was not going to do well. The surprise was that Harry Truman, this kind of unknown senator from Kansas,
Right.
would become the vice president and become the accidental president.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that the country probably was in a good mood to amend the Constitution to limit the president to 2 terms. And I think that's been good. That has been good for the country.
Right.
We haven't gone to great extremes, at least in modern history, right? We've had a Democratic administration for a couple of terms, maybe 3 or 4 terms, and then the pendulum swings the other way, and I think that keeps the country kind of on an even keel.
Right. But there's no reason why we can't do that with the rest of our politicians. What's even more egregious is the number of people that, are part of the Washington establishment. They never go away. They never go away.
Well, people are defeated in an election.
Yeah, the administrative state stays.
And then they become a lobbyist, or they become a cabinet member, or they get a bureaucratic political patronage job.
Right.
Running some whatever. We'll be back right after this. Action for Life is proud to sponsor A Conversation with Father Orsi. Action for Life is an all-volunteer, pro-life, interfaith ministry that's focused on the sanctity of life from conception to natural death. In addition to sponsoring this TV program, Action for Life provides financial support and life assistance to any woman who wishes to carry her baby to term in anticipation of an adoption. Action for Life also provides financial assistance to a variety of pro-life organizations, including maternity homes, pregnancy resource centers, anti-human trafficking agencies, and sidewalk advocates, but to name a few. Please consider making a donation so that we can continue in the fight to save preborn babies. You can donate online at actionforlife.org. Thank you and God bless. Welcome back to A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm B.C. Cloutier. Father, final thoughts.
Final thoughts is, well, we have a nice discussion regarding term limits. And folks, elections are coming up. And one of the questions that you should be asking those people running for office in your district or your state, Senate, Congress, what do they think about term limits? Many of the politicians say, I'm all for term limits until they get elected. And then they're not for term limits, and they tell us, well, we can't go now. We have legislation that we have to deal with. We have a lot of people that are begging us to stay on and to continue to fight for the people. As you can see, at the moment, our country is having a problem with a gerontocracy. That means a bunch of old people who don't want to go away, and some of them have lost their capacity to govern. So please make this one of your concerns in the next election and press your representatives to vote for term limits.
Join us again next week, same time, same place, for A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm B.C. Cloutier. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. God bless. Hi, B.C. Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events.